Indiana, Sandy Hook United Methodist Church. We're here on Thursday for the Psalm of this week as we prepare for the fourth Sunday of Advent. Advent is a season of waiting, it's a season of anticipation, it's a season of expectation as we are preparing ourselves for the arrival of Jesus Christ. Now, we look backwards and see the birth of Christ to help us anticipate what the second coming of Jesus will be like. And in this psalm today, we go to Psalm 89, verses 1 to 4 and 19 to 26. Psalm 89, verses 1 through 4 and 19 to 26. The first thing I would like to say about this particular psalm, it's a royal psalm. There are several psalms in the Psalter. Psalm 2, 18, 45, 72, and 110, as well as Psalm 89, are considered royal psalms. They would be used in inauguration ceremonies. They would be used at weddings. They would be used at funerals. They would be used in special moments. And what's common amongst the royal psalms is mentioning of God's covenant with David, God's promise that there would be a king in the line of David. There's a special love for David's family, a loyalty, and God's promise that there will be a king in David's line. So that as you read this psalm, you definitely see the emphasis upon a human king in the line of David, but also God's involvement in their life. And when I was reading through this, I was just amazed at the number of times I saw the word I used for God in this psalm. These are things that God does, right? So verse 4, it says, I will establish and build. Verse 19, it says, I have set and exalted. Verse 20, I have found and anointed. Verse 21, I shall remain and strengthen. Verse 23, I will crush and strike down. And verse number 25, I will set. So all these verbs speak about the nature of God's involvement in bringing about this David's dynasty that we read about yesterday in Samuel. And it's interesting that why is God so involved? And you see this right away in the first couple verses. The psalmist says, I will sing the Lord's loyal love forever. I will proclaim your faithfulness with my own mouth from one generation to the next. Verse 2, it says, that's why I say your loyal love is rightly built forever. You establish your faithfulness in heaven. So this idea of God's loyal love and his faithfulness is the reason that God does those things and brings about this kingship through David's family tree, which eventually takes us to what I believe is the point of the psalm, is anticipation of the coming Messiah who is in David's family. And we as Christians point to Jesus. This points to Christ being the king, right? And so what we see here is an anticipation of the coming Messiah. So God has this covenant, this sacred promise with David and his family. A covenant is like a sacred, divine promise in which humans and God make together and commit their faithfulness. And what we see in this, as well as really the whole Old Testament, is God's faithfulness, even though Israel was unfaithful. God's faithful, even though David is unfaithful. We see human beings' unfaithfulness, but God's sacred promise is built upon his loyal love and his faithfulness. And so God will bring a Messiah. God will bring a Savior out of that. And then the other interesting thing I saw in the psalm was this mention of God defeating the enemy through this Messiah. No enemy will oppress him. No wicked person will make him suffer. I will crush all his foes in front of him. I will strike down all those who hate him. Now, when we think of the Messiah, that didn't happen, did it? I mean, Jesus was the one who's crushed. His enemies killed him, right? But I think that's a great reminder of who the true enemy is through God's eyes. The true enemy isn't human beings. The true enemy isn't flesh and blood, as Paul says. The true enemy is Satan and his forces. All of evil is the enemy. And so what we see is at the cross, Jesus defeated Satan and Jesus defeated evil. And what we have now, as we look in the world, even though it's everywhere, we see a kind of a fallen foe who is trying to do everything he possibly can to kind of take as many people down with him, right? And so even though Satan has been defeated, he is still on his way out, trying to lie and convince Christians and non-Christians alike that God isn't real. So the lies are what he said. So all of that saying is that God promises to defeat evil, and he does through Jesus's death and resurrection. So Royal Psalm. It's a psalm about David's family tree and God's involvement to bring about a future king, a Messiah, through the line of David, which is Jesus. And God has promised through Jesus to defeat the evil and enemy of God, which is Satan. So that's what I got for today. What did you get? Psalm 89. Would you share your thoughts in the comments? And as always, we kind of end with thinking about what does this mean to us? And the questions that I wrote down deal with, do I trust God's promises? Do I trust that God will completely set us free at the second coming of Jesus? Do I trust God's promises? And then the other thing is that God, through all of these passages this week, uses ordinary people, people who don't have it all together, kind of like yours truly. So does God want to use me? And so if so, what does that look like? So I hope you will share your thoughts in the comments, or share it with a spouse or someone in your church and talk about this, because we want to learn from each other. All right, that's all I got. Grace and peace, everyone. Take care.